This morning's ancient witness is from Luke, chapter 23, verse 33 through 43. When they had reached the place called the Skull, they crucified Jesus there, together with the criminals, one on his right and one on his left. And Jesus said, "Abba, forgive them. They don't know what they are doing." Then they divided his garments, rolling dice for them. The people stood there watching. The rulers, however, jeered him and said, "He saved others, let him save himself, if he really is the Messiah of God, the chosen one." The soldiers also mocked him. They served Jesus sour wine and said, "If you are really the King of the Jews, save yourself." There was an inscription above Jesus that read, "This is the King of the Jews." One of the criminals who hung there beside him insulted Jesus too, saying, "Are you really the Messiah? Then save yourself and us." But the other answered the first with a rebuke. "Don't you even fear God? We are only paying the price for what we have done, but this one has done nothing wrong." Then he said, "Jesus, remember me when you come into your glory." Jesus replied, "The truth is, today you'll be with me in paradise."
I recently heard a heartwarming story. A woman by the name of Jolena found herself extremely low on money. She was in the midst of a painful divorce, and her lack of resources caused her to feel overwhelmed. It was an expensive process. She was having a hard time paying essential living costs on her own, with the added expense of an attorney and such. So she did a very hard thing. She asked a coworker if she could borrow $20 until payday. That's what she needed to cover food and gas, she said. And the next day, she found an envelope on her desk with $200 and a note that said, "Don't pay us back, but do pay it forward." The note was signed by her coworkers. Pay it forward. I'm sure you've heard stories like that, maybe even that one in particular. It's a little bit of love and kindness that goes a long way. Long enough, in fact, to change Jolena's life. Thanks to her co-workers, she went on to find and marry a kind and loving partner. Needless to say, she was very grateful for her heroes that day. Now, today is a couple of things. It is the Sunday that is closest to Thanksgiving. We could talk about that if we wanted to. And in some ways, we are. Two of our hymn selections for the day are traditional Thanksgiving hymns, some other music. And what, if anything, is Thanksgiving but a day to look back and be grateful? And we do this by celebrating our gratitude or thanks for what we have with those near and dear to our hearts. We recognize abundance and gather to feast from that cornucopia of harvest treasures. Now, this year, Thanksgiving is a little bit of a different circumstance with the recent reduction of food benefits for those in need of assistance. And with that, it has been nice to see that we've set about to make a difference in the lives of people in the community of the Palouse. So thank you to all those who are helping out in one way or another with the Thanksgiving meal here at the church this week. If only just one person shows up, it will be well worth the effort. Now, today also marks the end of the liturgical year. And maybe that's not a big deal to you, But personally, I enjoy the practice. I find it to be an effective way to think through the seasons of life, like an anchor, I suppose, amidst the chaos. And that's really the purpose of it, I think, to ground us or to provide some sense of order in the chaos that leads to suffering of one form or another. And that is a lot like how life goes, right? Through ebbs and flows, through ups and downs, through triumphs and difficulties, and through love and loss. We are indeed creatures of transition, you and I. And this Sunday in particular, our journey through the Gospel of Luke comes to a close, I'm sad to say, as we take a look at a picture of Jesus on the cross. That's a familiar sight for me. In fact, I got that just about every Sunday growing up. Yet, there's something to the journey to the cross, something about that is just as, if not more, compelling. And so what began last December with Mary's vision for her baby at the beginning of Luke ends today with Jesus on the cross. Along the way, we've interrupted the story with the events of Easter, perhaps the thing that might make us most Christian, that of resurrection, that there is a life after death, that there is hope in struggle, that circumstances are inevitably different on the other side. So this Sunday, sometimes called Reign of Christ Sunday, Easter and Christmas come into close connection. The cross and the incarnation. The beginning encounters the ending. Or is it the other way around? It can be helpful, I think, to consider that Jesus, the one condemned before the crowds, is the same one born in a small, isolated place, an anywhere town, perhaps someplace forgotten. And the one praised by angels and shepherds and stargazers from afar is the same one that will suffer through betrayal, abandonment, and be left to die in shame, no less. And this is what we hold in tension. It's a creative tension, though, as we make this journey year in and year out, Thanksgiving to Thanksgiving, and just before the dark days of winter arrive. More on that when we enter Advent next Sunday. But as we make this journey year in and year out, our perspective begins to change on what it's like to be on the journey or in the journey, and what it means to be agents of change. I like how Presbyterian minister Dolores Williams frames it. She says, the kingship of Christ can only be understood through dissonance and harmony. That the one called the King of Kings is poor little Mary's boy, as if whispered by a woman approaching the later years of her life and standing alone. On one hand, we have the reign of Christ, or the reign of love, maybe. And on the other, we behold God's child who is exquisitely vulnerable. She says, like two songs sung back and forth through a call and a response. Each needs the other for the light to shine through. And so over the course of the liturgical season, spanning from last Thanksgiving to this one, we've taken a look at the ministry of Jesus as Luke tells it, and what happens when love breaks through the circumstance of life. It is a new era of love that began with the birth of Jesus, but not yet happening in full. With one more lesson to go. This idea that salvation or wholeness for all is not a future hope, but indeed can be a present reality. And we pick up the story with a stark portrait of kingship. We have the reign of Caesar made known in the cross, a very humiliating form of execution, but also one meant to intimidate those under the reign of the emperor. It was a very real projection of power and domination in that day. And Jesus, being there on the cross, we find him not just to be forsaken by his friends, but also mocked by his enemies with a sarcastic sign hanging over his head that essentially says, "Here is your king." Yet there is something a bit deeper to be found underneath this story. Here we find, like many of the stories in the Hebrew Scriptures before it, the persecuted calling on God for rescue. I have certainly done that many times. And we find the offering of sour wine to drink. Perhaps I have done that too. But this story also brings to bear the prophet Isaiah's tale about the quiet poise of a servant in the midst of suffering. Now, I say all that to say that the Hebrew Scriptures were not so much foretelling Jesus' suffering on the cross, but more of illuminating the way suffering tends to unfold, much like shining a light into the darkness. Abandonment, isolation, confusion. Suffering seems to be the very place of God forsakenness, the place that God has left. Yet it is in this place of suffering, especially there in suffering, that God is present and that God is active and that God is at work. Even there in that place on the hilltop, where God's reign is mocked and Caesar's reign seems triumphant, God is there. That even in the very heart of the effect of Caesar's way of domination, the way of love prevails in the form of servanthood. Kindness appears within the mockery, and forgiveness amidst condemnation. Suffering may just be that very thing that makes us all human. But the good news for us is that God seeks to bring wholeness out of that brokenness of suffering. That God's creative love makes for the difference. And in that love and in that kindness and in that forgiveness, the seeds of wholeness can be found. For Jesus, they were rules to live by, as if some unsung hero had shown him compassion from the start. He was determined to pay that forward, all the way to here. And not just Jesus, but the one by his side as well, as he recognizes the love, the forgiveness, the kind act Jesus showed for him and the other as they are there too. Even in the midst of the process of dying, God's love persists. And when we find that love and latch onto that love, we can let it rule our lives. And we can pay that forward one small bit at a time, so that God would gather into God's reign and kingdom of love the ones who feel broken and who feel sorrow, so that all may know wholeness and joy and forgiveness. You see, when we do those little things like offer a kind word or advocate for others or come together to make a meal for those finding themselves low on food, we offer hope. And for some, hope is everything, and certainly enough to make the difference. And certainly enough to make the difference, and lives are changed in the process. Closing, I'll say, it seems we're not just agents of change, not just folks that protest for social advancement, but we're agents of hope too. Thanks be to God. Amen.